If you spent any amount of time in the fandom surrounding Vivziepop, you've likely heard of her Zoophobia series. This was Vivzie's first project and was where a lot of her concepts for her later shows originated from. I've covered Zoophobia many times on my channel, but I've never actually sat down to read through the entire series and give it the care it deserved. So in this video I'll do exactly that. I hope you enjoy. Prior to the creation of Zoophobia, Vivzie would draw frequently and post short animations on a variety of topics. This is all visible on her Zoophobia X YouTube channel, which operated between 2008 and 2012. Throughout high school, Viv would doodle drawings of a couple characters, the main ones being created around the main five, being Vanex the cat, Kayla the kangaroo, a chimera called Zillion, Jack the jackal, and Spam the fox. Two additional important characters were Damien the Prince of Hell and Addison the half-human, half-fennec fox. Vivzie would also post drawings and updates on her Viv's Mind DeviantArt page. This page was active up until 2020, where it was hacked and had nearly everything deleted. As a result, the over 300 posts were reduced down to about 30, meaning years of content was lost. Vivzie was always interested in creating a comic series, which we can see in a 3-page comic she made way back in 2007. We can see a couple characters talking in hell when Satan shows up. These elements will be important later, but it helps to show the early development of the project. Viv would continue to post animatics featuring these characters to her YouTube channel, with her final upload being on May 19th, 2012. The reason for her stopping uploads on this channel is because 2 months later in July, she would publish the start of her Zoophobia webcomic, with the name obviously taken from her first YouTube channel. In September of 2012, Vivzie would create her Vivziepop channel. Around this time, she created the Zoophobia Crazies Tumblr blog, which would post regular updates about the series alongside her main Tumblr page. She would also create zoophobiacomic.com to host the project. If we use the Wayback Machine, we can see what it looked like before it was taken offline years later. So between 2012 and 2016, Vivzie aimed to post 10 books. However, they were never made following the comic's discontinuation. Only one book was published, which featured 4 chapters in Arc 1, with 1 additional filler chapter. Viv also posted the first chapter of Arc 2, but shortly after the project was put on a hiatus. In total, there were 311 pages produced. In the next section, I'll go through the entirety of Book 1, and after each chapter, I'll give some thoughts on them. These will be my raw thoughts after reading each section, so you can see the perspective of someone reading it all for the first time. Once I've read everything, I'll have more conclusive thoughts after. So the chapter starts off with the series protagonist Cameron Walden talking to her therapist about some vivid dreams she's been having lately. Cameron hurries along to meet her job counselor called Casey, since Cameron is unemployed at the moment. There is something immediately off about the encounter, however. Cameron immediately recognises Casey from somewhere but can't put her finger on it. Casey mentions that there's a job vacancy to do with counselling, which Cameron has a degree in. Cameron begs for the job and accepts it, with Casey mentioning that she'll have to relocate and board a private jet. Cameron thanks her and leaves. Once she's out the door, Casey transforms and reveals herself as some sort of otherworldly entity, and she clutches an apple. Casey laughs and thanks Cameron, clearly highlighting that Casey is going to do something bad to her. Next, we see Cameron board the plane to her new job, with the pilot being a woman called Snake. Cameron falls asleep while on the flight, and we see a large silhouette of Casey looming over the plane, with text saying there's no turning back now. Casey wakes up mid-flight and freaks out because of a bird outside the window. She falls asleep again, wakes up, and then leaves the plane to be surprised by a bunch of characters. These wacky animals talk to Cameron, and Cameron screams in terror. She distracts them for a moment and then runs off. Cameron sprints away and she sees a huge city. A large cheetah called Zachariah surprises her from behind and asks if she's alright, causing Cameron to faint. This will be more relevant as the story progresses, but Cameron has zoophobia, which is the crippling fear of animals. Cameron wakes up in the nurse's office where she is greeted by a crazy character. Cameron escapes and runs into Zachariah again, where he asks if she knows what her job is. Cameron says no, and the pair go for a walk. They meet President Winston, who is this bizarre octopus creature. Zachariah explains to Cameron that she was hired as a guidance counsellor for the Zoo Phoenix Academy. He says that Cameron was meant to be informed about the rules before coming there. However, since she wasn't, it means that whoever sent her there did it maliciously. Zach gives the unfortunate news that once a human arrives in this world, they can't return home. As a result, Cameron is stuck in this interspecies society. Zach brings in Jackie, the drama instructor, to give Cameron a tour. Jackie is a blue and yellow humanoid macaw. Jackie brings Cameron on a tour around the school, where Cameron asks if she's insane. They then enter the art wing, where they run into Jackie's husband Alonzo, who is a dance instructor and a scarlet macaw. Jackie takes Cameron to visit the art room, music room, and film room. They then visit the drama room where all of Jackie's students reside. Here we see a couple of important characters to the story, dubbed the main five. We see Damien the Antichrist with his unique black eyes, text, and red fur. Kayla the kangaroo. Jack the jackal, whose main gimmick is that he's cursed with immortality and bad luck. He is immediately crushed by a studio light. We also see Zill the chimera and Vanexa the cat. Vanexa escorts Cameron to her office and Cameron looks at a gift she's received from the staff. Zechariah, who is also the vice principal of the academy, appears in Cameron's office, which startles her. Zech takes Cameron outside to look at the moonlight and some glowing fish. Zech welcomes her home and Cameron asks where she's going to live. This marks the end of the first arc, with one additional page showing Casey transformed into a creepy creature. It has text that reads, "And so it begins." So, Chapter 1, as you saw, was the intro to the series. It introduced the protagonist Cameron, the main cast of characters, and the world of Safe Haven. Right off the bat, we're left with a couple of questions, like how did Cameron teleport to this world, and who is this Casey character that keeps showing up? For my initial thoughts, I think this was a really solid introduction to the series. It gets the viewer hooked on the premise while leaving a lot of questions unanswered, which we will hopefully learn the answers to in future arcs. There's a couple elements I really love so far. Firstly, the art style. It's Vivzie's old school signature style and it really shines here. The art direction is phenomenal and everything really pops. The characters, backgrounds and text are all superb. I especially love how each character has their own coloured speech bubbles. It just oozes so much personality and it's really fun. Cameron seems like an interesting protagonist, and while reading, I immediately drew parallels to Pomni from the Amazing Digital Circus. Both characters are transported to crazy worlds they're unfamiliar of, and they both react in a similar way, being that they're terrified and wonder if they're insane. It's such a cool direction for the character, and I'm interested to see how Cameron develops as the series goes on. I also like the fact that the existence of Safe Haven is immediately put into question from the get-go. Cameron remarks that she's been having vivid dreams at the start of the chapter. She also says she recognises Casey from somewhere. Perhaps she saw Casey in one of her previous dreams. At least to me, it feels like Vivzie is putting the question in our minds of whether or not it's a real place or all a dream. A bit like in Alice in Wonderland or The Wizard of Oz. The academy is called Zoo Phoenix Academy, so its initials are ZP, the same initials as the word Zoophobia. So perhaps the entire thing is just a dream sequence where Cameron is teleported to this world to overcome her fear of animals. On the other hand, you could put forward the idea that Cameron recognised Casey because Casey has been tormenting her prior to that meeting in the counsellor office. It's made clear throughout Arc 1 that Casey is following Cameron and sent her to that world. It makes sense that Casey was haunting her dreams prior to this point. The fact that I'm already discussing theories from only one arc just shows how strong Zoophobia's worldbuilding is. I also just love the little references to Casey throughout the pages, it's really cozy. There's a couple criticisms I think are worth noting. Firstly is I wish that we had a bit more time with Cameron before she got transported, maybe in her previous job or working to give a bit more depth to the character. For example, if she had a family or friends in the real world, then it would make her getting teleported to Safe Haven a bit complicated, since basically her whole life is uprooted. Secondly is that we're immediately bombarded with a bunch of characters. They all have such unique and vivid designs, but it's a bit jarring to the viewer. We got the names of a few, but the rest are unnamed. We're only one chapter in, and I'm struggling a little to remember the names. I hope that things slow down a little in future arcs, so that the characters get introduced at a steady pace so we can get to know them better. So chapter 1.5 is just 4 pages. I've seen it called Meal or Intermission. It's basically just a short filler segment to bridge the gap between chapter 1 and 2. Cameron receives a package and hoses down the delivery creature, showing that she's still very much afflicted by zoophobia. The 4th page shows Casey eating a sandwich saying, "So let's get this party started then, shall we?" Basically showing that she's watching. I think these 4 pages are cute and are just a bit of fun filler. The next chapter carries on right from chapter 1. We find out that Zill and Kayla are a couple and Damien hits on Kayla. Jackie chats to Cameron and explains the concept of shapeshifting and how various creatures in that world have that power. Jackie transforms into a more bird-like form, showing that she can swap between that and a humanoid version. Kayla talks to Vanexa about how next week is her 3-year anniversary with Zill. We cut to Damien and Jack talking about the anniversary, however Zill has forgotten. Jack is going to remind Zill, however Damien declines and instead locks Jack in a locker. Cameron is talking to Jackie and we're introduced to the school's creature studies teacher Carrie, who is a demon. We also meet Fabian, another teacher who is a red fox. Fabian hits on Cameron and asks her out to tea, and leaves before she can give her answer. Cameron and Jackie head back to the drama area where they meet a couple more new characters. First, Mackenzie, a student with red hair, and Gustav, a teacher's assistant and past pupil. We're introduced to another freshman student called Sahara, who is practicing magic with a giant cauldron. Zill is waiting for Kayla and wonders where she is, with Sahara reminding him that it's their anniversary. It cuts to Kayla sitting depressed by herself in a dress waiting for a candlelight dinner. Zill shows up a little late, but Kayla is upset since Zill obviously forgot about their anniversary. Kayla runs off crying and says she needs time to recover from this. Zill is sad as well and walks home by himself. He's then stalked by another character. We skip to presumably the next day, and Zill is distraught from the incident. Damien takes the opportunity to laugh at his despair. We cut to Kayla, who's doing some fencing to let off some steam, and she's quite upset and throws her weapon to the wall where it sticks. Cameron is walking down a hallway and is immediately confronted by two crazy characters in top hats. They talk about complete nonsense, and the text fills the background of the screen. Cameron walks into a random room to escape them and closes the door behind her. She realises she's now in a room with a horse called Brutus, which roars at her. Carrie comes in and tells Brutus off for scaring Cameron and offers her a drink. The two walk into Carrie's room, which features skeletons, bookshelves, and an open fireplace. The two relate because both of their mums have died, and Carrie explains that she's in charge of creature studies. Carrie warns Cameron about Fabian, telling her he's good for nothing and pounces on any newcomer. Carrie explains the lore of the skeletons and how spirits exist in Safe Haven. She asks Cameron how the talent show tryouts were, with Cameron shuddering in fear. We cut back to Zill and Kayla. Zill is begging Kayla to forgive him, and Kayla is having none of it. Before Kayla can give a response, the door blasts open when we see that creepy character that was following Zill the night before. He reveals himself as Horus and challenges Zill to a duel. Horus is a bird-like griffin vulture and has magical wind powers, which he threatens to destroy the school with if Zill doesn't duel him. Zill grabs Horus and flies him out through the roof, where they run into a vampire queen called Venganza. So Venganza mind controls Zill and starts drinking his blood, but she's stopped by Kayla. Zill snaps out of the mind control and flies Kayla to safety. They fly back to school with Venganza in pursuit. Carrie battles Venganza and gets bitten by Simon, Venganza's thrall. Fabian walks out and gets attacked by Simon. Kayla and Zill make up and kiss while Carrie fights Venganza. Zek shows up, which causes Venganza to turn into a flock of bats and disappear. Not before taunting Zek, showing that she knows him. Cameron and Zill go to the nurse's office to get healed and meet Miss Keiko, the crazy doctor. Simon was imprisoned in a jail cell while Zek, Carrie and Fabian discuss him. Zek wonders why there's vampires in the city, which causes Simon to taunt him, saying wouldn't you like to know. We cut back to Zill and Kayla making up with the pair kissing. Damien looks on angrily and says, "Aw, come on." So that's the end of chapter 3. Overall, I think this was a solid chapter. It raised the stakes by introducing the series' first villain characters, being Venganza and Simon. It was also cute to see Zill and Kayla's relationship fleshed out a bit more. So far, my favourite character is definitely Damien. I love his quirky douchebag attitude, and he reminds me a lot of Jax from the Digital Circus or Muscle Man from Regular Show. He's not a villain, but he's basically just there to make fun of the main cast and acts like a sort of comic relief. One thing I will note though so far is that I think Damien probably would have been a better fit in the main 5 compared to Spam. Spam so far is only seen in a single frame, being one where he licks Cameron. I understand that he's one of the 5 OG characters created, but I feel like he's just been completely absent so far, compared to Damien, who's one of the characters that's on screen the most. That's just an observation of mine so far. Chapter 3 starts off in Hell, which is our first time in this setting. We meet Major Styx, who is a blue demonic jackal who's the head guard of Hell and serves Lucifer. We see Styx talking to a couple of demons before he's jump-scared by Lucifer, who's looking for his son Damien. Damien was absent from his weekend performance since he was in the human world. However, the fact Damien goes to school in Safe Haven is kept a secret from Lucifer. Styx lies and says he has no clue and runs to find Tentadora, who is missing. This entire sequence was actually drawn by Viv way back in 2007, meaning this plot point and characters were made way back then, which is really cool. We cut back to the human world and see Damien telling stories to a couple students. He realised he forgot to bring snacks, however doesn't worry because his nanny will probably bring them for him. This is when Damien's drop-dead gorgeous nanny Tentadora shows up. Tentadora is an artificial cyborg nanny created to look after Damien, and for some reason has the most lustful design in the entire comic. Tenta gives Damien his snacks and gives him a kiss goodbye, which causes Damien to blush and he says he's embarrassed. Tenta teleports away and all of the students remark of how hot she was. Back in Hell, Tenta runs into Styx, who is freaking out because Damien is missing. Damien is worried because if Lucifer or anyone else finds out where he's at, it'll be game over. Tenta says that Daxler will never catch on. Daxler is Damien's teacher in Hell and we see him teaching Damien, except it's actually a doll replacement. Daxler's probably too old or has bad eyesight and doesn't realise that it's not him. Tenta goes to fetch new batteries while Styx talks to a new character called Boswick. Boz tries to start an argument with Styx when he's interrupted by some new demonic furry creatures that similarly ask where Damien is. Styx shouts at them, which leads to him being chastised by the head of the house, Hilda. Tenta walks in while not looking and accidentally reveals that Damien is on the surface with everyone else hearing. Tenta and Hilda argue over whether Damien was raised properly, while Boz and the creatures sneak off to go to the surface. Tenta and Styx realise they have to find the other characters now as well. Back in Safe Haven, we see a couple of individuals talking, when Boz and the children appear out of thin air. Boz tries to flirt with the ladies. Across the school, Tenta and Styx appear behind Cameron and ask her when the film club Damien was in was let out, to which Cameron reveals it was let out 40 minutes previously. The two of them leave to find Damien, and Cameron is jump-scared by the demonic creatures. Cameron seeks shelter in a nearby room, which coincidentally has Jackie inside. Jackie reveals that the creatures are called Hell Sprites and that they're looking for Damien. The vampire character exclaims that it's weird that they're scared of vampires, but not the literal son of Satan, and this leads to an argument. Cameron interrupts the group by shouting that she's been there for 3 whole weeks and knows nothing about the world or what's going on. Salvia, one of the school's staff who has psychic powers, begins to explain the lore of the world and how Safe Haven is a sanctuary. She explains how Safe Haven, as the name suggests, is a utopia that protects all the creatures living inside that would otherwise be ostracized elsewhere in the world, thereby explaining why there's so few humans. It's split into 7 districts, with each having its own purpose. Some rules and pacts were put in place to protect Safe Haven, such as preventing evil forces from entering. This is why any humans that enter can't leave, because if these pacts are broken, then evil forces could enter Safe Haven and corrupt it. Safe Haven has not had a violent crime or dangerous predator in years. However, the appearance of a vampire queen puts that into question. The vampire explains how him and the queen were sleeping in a cellar in Berlin before they were randomly teleported into Safe Haven. He continues by saying how Safe Haven has so many rare and diverse creatures, so they have a special opportunity to feast. He also says that news will slip out to the outside world that it's possible to get in, so more nefarious creatures will eventually slip in. He asks why Damien is allowed in the school, with Zechariah explaining that he was allowed in since his 2 caretakers were unhappy with his previous school. They argue a bit, with Salvia asking if Cameron is taking in all the info, with her responding that she needs a nap. We cut back to Damien and the others at the marketplace. Damien is excited because it's his first time outside of school on the surface. He looks at some comic books, however him and the others are called sinners by a nearby priest who exclaims that the books are blasphemous. The priest explains that he's saved and wants them to change their sinful ways, which angers Damien, who shouts back at the priest. The priest then pulls out his cross and scorns Damien, causing Damien to transform into a demonic form. Boz watches from afar, grinning since he wants to enjoy the carnage. Damien is shot by 2 creatures of the Safe Haven Authority, so basically the police force. We cut back to Tenta and Styx, who entered an adult club, with Tenta deliberately tricking Styx by saying that Damien could be inside so that they would go in together. Tenta is immediately notified that Damien is in danger. The 2 of them rush to save Damien, with Tenta having transformed into a robotic form which features new weapons. Satan himself, or perhaps an avatar of his, shows up and scares everyone, shouting that the demons should return home now. They reluctantly walk in and are brought back to hell. We're inside Satan's palace, and Satan is upset that Damien was on the surface. Tenta, Styx and Damien explain that he didn't like his school in hell and begged them for a little freedom. This causes Lucifer's wife, Nerissa, to ask why Damien hates it in hell. Damien says how he loves hell and his family, but he's stuck inside the palace since outside is too dangerous, while on the surface it's full of adventure and he wants to live his own life. Nerissa remarks that perhaps it could be a learning experience for him, and we get this adorable little shot of Damien being cute. Lucifer says that he'll allow it if his safety is guaranteed, but says that if Styx intend to do something without consulting him first, he won't be so docile. Damien thanks and hugs his parents, with Boz angry looking on with the Hell Sprites. Elsewhere, we see Fabian talking to Cameron. The 2 go for a walk around the grounds, and for a brief second, Fabian appears as a bloodthirsty animal. Cameron jumps in fear, and Fabian is back to normal, giving us a glimpse of how in Cameron's mind these animals are far more scary than they are in real life. Fabian has a heart-to-heart conversation with Cameron, explaining that there's nothing to be afraid of. His appearance shifts again, but goes back to normal. Cameron smiles and says she could get used to living there, with the 2 of them happily looking at the stars. And that's the end of chapter 3. That chapter was very long, but also covered a lot of content, and I really enjoyed it. There was a bunch of new characters and they all had such wonderful personalities, one example being Styx and Tenta. They have such a cool dynamic, and I definitely shipped them together after reading this chapter. The other side characters introduced were also neat, like the 3 Hell Sprites. It's cool how one of them never speaks, instead holding up a sign instead. This just oozes so much personality and makes the pages so much more fun to read. There wasn't a moment where I was bored or felt the pacing dragging. It was constructed really well. So far, the one criticism I have is that it's a little difficult to keep track of all of the characters. In a lot of pages we don't find out the names of the characters, so as a result I have to keep the wiki open beside me to search through and find their name. Even when we do find out the names, it's again hard to keep track of them since there's just so many characters. A neat addition would be a little fact file at the end of each chapter. This could contain little images and information about each character, such as their species and personality. This would allow the readers to quickly get to know the cast better so you can get more engrossed in the world. Chapter 4 starts by showing Cameron in bed looking out the window. We can see Casey's face in the bottom left of the image, again highlighting that she's watching everything. Cameron livens her office up by placing some decorations around, and she gets ready for her first client, who is Jack. His father passed away while his mother was pregnant, and his aunt Nerissa married the devil. His mum begged them for a deal, and as a result, Jack got blessed with immortality. However, he's cursed with supernatural bad luck. He can also feel pain. Jack continues on by detailing how his curse impacts his day-to-day life and how people interact with him. Jack says that he only has a couple of close friends as a result, with his best friend being Zill. Jack continues by disclosing his childhood growing up where he met Zill. Zill was the only person unfazed by his curse, so they became great friends and he moved in with Jack and his mother. They attended school together and Zill would use his powers to protect Jack. They also met Kayla and Zill fell in love with her. Zill finally got close to her when they attended the school musical together and both got lead roles. Jack says that although Kayla and all of Zill's new friends are amazing, he misses how it was before when the two of them were closer. He talks about his family in hell, and that although he loves them, it reminds him of his curse. He details one time when he was in hell outside of the palace when he was attacked by a large monster, but saved by a purple character called Jill. The two became great friends, and Jill joined Hell's Royal Guard. However, they don't spend as much time together because Jill met another unnamed character. Jack feels a bit sad because he has a crush on her. Cameron asks Jack about his hobbies, with Jack happily naming them all. Cameron gives him some job advice and the two smile because Cameron isn't afraid of Jack, even with his animalistic appearance and supernatural curse. Jack leaves the room happy, however he's cornered by another bully character called Rusty. Rusty shouts insults at Jack and pushes him. Jack sadly walks to his job at the observatory, staring at the beautiful sky. Cameron meets Zack and talks about how her first client went, and we see another shot of Jack at the observatory. This marks the end of the chapter. This chapter was a little short, but gave some important backstory for a bunch of the main cast members. Jack seems like an interesting character, and his backstory with Hell ties him in with that portion of the world. It would be cool to find out how his aunt met Lucifer and married him. Zill's lore was also quite interesting and left a lot to be uncovered, especially since he seems to be some sort of special chimera with unknown powers. The segments about how he met Kayla also explains their romance. In previous chapters, I personally thought the pairing was a bit weak and there wasn't much chemistry. However, after realising how they first met, it definitely makes a lot more sense, since Kayla has a similar personality to Zill. She will stand up for what's right, and that attitude is what made Zill fall in love with her, so I think that's really cute. We also saw Cameron finally do her job in the school, which was neat as well. So this chapter is a little confusing, since it's normally labelled as either chapter 5 or the start of arc 2. Regardless, it starts with a character we saw a couple times in previous chapters called Addison waking up. Addison greets his mother and starts walking to school with Damien and Sahara. As they are walking, they bump into Rusty and his gang, which causes a confrontation. Another deer character called Autumn comes over and argues with Rusty as the gang slink away and let the two have at it. At school, we see two new characters who are teachers' assistants. They're called Nathan and Gustav. Gustav walks into the art room and meets Addison, who's painting a portrait. Gustav compliments the piece and says that Addison is talented, which causes him to blush. The two chat more, with Addison getting noticeably flustered. Gustav says he wished he had met them sooner and calls him cute. Addison covers his face since he's embarrassed. Addison's mother walks into the room and Mackenzie, who's behind the pair, trips and red paint spills over Addison. Mackenzie apologises and touches Addison's arm, causing Addison to get upset. The two are escorted to the office by Gustav. We see Rusty and Autumn, with Rusty laughing that Addison was sent to the office. Autumn calls Rusty by his real name Reuben, which irritates him. We see some other characters spreading rumours about the incident, twisting the story and saying that Mackenzie was attacked by Addison. Mackenzie walks past and they laugh at her. Addison and Gustav are seen walking together after Addison is cleaned up. Addison runs into the emo kid from Horton Hears a Who, Tom, who starts to bully her. Tom grabs Addison's tail and Addison slaps him. Gustav comes in to break up the argument and Tom shouts back. Addison reveals that he dated Tom for a week, and this embarrasses him, with everyone around laughing. Tom runs off and bumps into Mackenzie, with everyone around saying "ooh" to the pair. Mackenzie runs off angrily and Tom looks at the book she left behind. Gustav and Addison talk when Sahara and Damien show up. They talk about the earlier incident with the paint, and Addison introduces them to Gustav. They are surprised that Gustav is actually only 19. Gustav asks Addison out on a date, which angers Damien, who says he's going to follow them. This is where the chapter abruptly ends. There's no end slide, so it's likely going to continue, but I'll cover the cancellation of the series in a bit. So overall that chapter was decent. It was a bit short since it was cut off obviously, but it introduced and fleshed out a bunch of new characters. I personally picked up a lot of romantic tension between Ruben and Autumn, and I'm pretty sure that was deliberate, so I shipped them together. As for the segments with Autumn and Gustav, it's not really appealing to me. I don't think they have as much chemistry together as the other characters, and I don't think that Autumn is particularly special. I much prefer the dynamics between Styx and Tenta or Kayla and Zill. So as you might have noticed, the latest chapter had an abrupt ending. Before I get into why the webcomic ended so suddenly, there's a couple scrapped pages that I think are worth mentioning. So the first is 2 pages from chapter 1. In the first one, we see Jackie singing to her class and introducing them to Cameron. In the second page, we see a character called Afkins hiss at Cameron, with Damien saying she has her work cut out for her. Afkins was the prototype version of Mackenzie before he was replaced by her, so that's why these 2 pages were scrapped. We see Afkins performing on stage, and Gunther, who is the original name of Gustav, criticizing her performance. Afkins falls off the stage and hisses. Cameron walks in and meets them for the first time and immediately asks Gunther if he's human, to which he says he's a snake. Zahara performs a magic trick using her cauldron, which goes wrong. Zill looks sad because Kayla isn't there, and this is when Zahara reminds him that it's their anniversary. So these pages were the early prototype versions of chapter 2. The reason they were altered is because Afkins and Gunther were 2 characters Viv purchased from another artist called Dollcreep. Viv redesigned the characters and changed their names, so as a result these pages had to be remade. Personally, I think the final versions of these characters on chapter 2 is much better than the original one. Not too much change story-wise either, but it's interesting to see the development of this scene. We have one scrapped page from chapter 3. We see some characters wonder if Afkins would like to join them. Afkins does a peculiar face, so they continue on. Addison wonders why Afkins even comes to the club at all, and Afkins does a sad face. This again reiterates that Afkins is a bit of the odd one out of the group, and perhaps due to their hissing and temper, they don't get on well with the rest of the cast. Again, this page was scrapped since Mackenzie replaced Afkins, and I personally think Mackenzie was a significant improvement. Her design is just a lot better, and the scene she's in portrays her personality much better. Lastly, for my favourite piece of scrapped content, we have the chapter called The Dream. This section was originally meant to be read between comic sections The Anniversary and The Devil's Son, so between chapters 3 and 4. It starts off with Cameron sleeping and she dreams that she'd be on a bright sandy area akin to perhaps heaven. She then suddenly sprouts wings and begins to fly as if she's an angel. We see Justine, the Sin of Pride, looking through a circular portal watching Cameron's dream. Casey asks Justine what she's watching, to which Justine furiously responds that she's watching the thing she always watches, being dreams. Justine's daughter, Ink, who is the deity of nightmares, comes in and says that the nightmares are scaring her, and Justine calls her a brat. She sends her back to her room, and Casey comments on her parenting methods. Justine then says that things are being set in motion and that she won't be forced to look at these dreams for much longer. In the next slide, we see Cameron wake up, remarking that she saw the dream again. Lastly, we see a page of Casey with some buzzwords beside her. So this chapter was clearly in there to introduce a couple of new characters, the first being Justine, who is the original Sin of Pride. Overall, I love this character and she's full of so much personality. I love how her colour and design changes based on her mood. We saw her daughter Ink, who is also really interesting. She was created as a sort of tragic character where she has the power to ink up frightening images, then bring them to life to haunt people's dreams. She doesn't like scaring people with these things, and regularly tries to paint things that are cute, but they end up being frightening, and she just can't help it. Originally, in the early stages of Zoophobia, there was a character called Veronica, who was created as a replacement for a character named Vivian, who is based on Vivziepop herself. She was originally going to be used as a best friend for Addison, but was repurposed as his twin sister. Veronica eventually was replaced by Ink, and we can see various art pieces of Ink interacting with other characters. Ink's name was given to her by Damien, who was her closest friend. Ink's real name is Nightmare, and we can see from various drawings that the two would be quite close, with Ink clearly blushing around Damien, hinting at an interest in him. I think this pairing would fit the two characters quite well. The bit about Cameron being an angel is hard to decipher. On one hand, it could just be a nightmare, or it could be foreshadowing later in the story that perhaps Cameron could become an angel. It's really odd. So why was this section cut? I wasn't able to find an answer, unfortunately. It was cut quite late in development, as you can tell from the fact that it was between 2 of the later chapters. I personally think it's a shame, since it seemed like a really thought-provoking chapter. It created more questions than it answered, which I really like. The first piece of media that most Vivziepop fans encountered was likely the Die Young music video. This animated music video released back in 2014 and became a huge hit, becoming Vivziepop's most viewed video throughout most of her channel's existence. This song featured a variety of Zoophobia characters dancing to Kesha's hit song Die Young. The main protagonist of the video was JJ the Werewolf, a character that was slated to appear in Book 2 of Zoophobia. The Die Young video went viral and introduced an entirely new audience to the series and Vivziepop as a whole. Eventually, in 2022, this video was mysteriously unlisted and a year later set to private. I have an entire video going over the lore of this video if you're interested in learning more. As I mentioned earlier, the Zoophobia webcomic abruptly ended during the art class arc, which was the second arc of Book 1. The rest of the book's arcs would have been titled as Chicas Lositas, Safe Haven, and The Talent Show. So what happened? Well, on November 14th, 2016, the comic was put on an indefinite hiatus. According to Viv, she wanted to put the comic on hold because she lost her connection with the series. She affirmed that the project wasn't dead, but just on ice until she could revisit it. A year later, on April 27th, 2017, Vivzie discussed Zoophobia further in a video titled Messy Zoophobia Ramble. In this 30-minute video, Viv addresses a lot of the questions she's had and elaborates further on why the comic was put on hold. Viv said that the environment surrounding the comic stopped being fun, and since she was a novice storyteller at the time, there was a bunch of messy mistakes and holes which she couldn't overlook. There wasn't a conventional structure or thought-out story. In order to fix the story, Viv said she wanted to give Zoophobia a rest and then come back to reimagine things when she has a better skill set. She mentioned that she has plenty of other fun projects to keep fans engaged in the meantime though. As I mentioned previously, 10 books were planned, but only a section of part 1 was ever made. Vivzie had posted various pieces of art and info over the years, so we can have a rough idea of what was in store for these future books. The rest of Book 1 would have continued with introducing Cameron to the rest of the school and its many characters. The final arc being a talent show which would set the stage for the start of Book 2. In the second book, the genre would shift to a more musical and film noir type, dealing with oppression and violent leadership. It is drafted that the story would follow mostly Kayla and would be subtitled Showtime. In Book 3, some heavy storylines would finally come into play. Book 4 is one of the shortest books and leans into a more supernatural sci-fi genre. This book would reveal that Allison is a failed attempt at splicing human and fennec fox DNA created at a facility called Xerxene. A key plot point being that Addison escaped this facility and the facility staff wanted him back there. A bunch of new villains would be introduced, with the most notable being Dr. Angelica. Later in the comic, he was to be mind-controlled by two other villains called Mirage and Malvada. They would activate him much like a sleeper agent. This was to reveal that the bindi on his forehead was in fact a third eye, much as to turn him into a violent psychopath, and with a name change to that of Adder. He also would have had power over other basilisks, as seen in various artworks involving him. Book 5 would again continue with Addison's story and Xerxene, though it would enter more dark topics. Books 6 to 10 were mostly about mythology and other related topics. One significant feature arc was called Angels and Demons. This would take place in Hell and would introduce a bunch of new characters who would later be reused as characters in Hazbin Hotel. At this point in the story, Heaven would be introduced, with angelic characters coming into play. Their job would be to come down to Earth to hunt demons. The general consensus being that the roles of Heaven and Hell were flipped, so the angelic characters were generally sinister and evil, whereas the demons from Hell were nuanced but flawed characters which would explain why they were in Hell. Personally, I think this idea is really interesting, much more so than what we got in Hazbin Hotel. So outside of those main arcs, there's a mountain of information about many characters that were supposed to appear in the show. I cannot go through all of them, but I seriously recommend checking the Zoophobia Wiki and having a scroll through. There's over 200 characters each, with unique personalities and designs. One batch of characters I really like are the supposed villains of the series. These were characters that would play a significant role in the series a bit later, however the comic never got to that point. So the first villain and my personal favourite was KC. We saw her a couple times throughout the webcomic, and she was the one who transported Cameron to Safe Haven, though we never found out an exact reason as to why. Personally, I just love her personality and design. It's really unique to have a shape-shifting, omnipresent villain, and Viv's signature wide-toothy grin is also present. Casey was supposed to have a run-in with various other characters like Alistair as well, so it's a shame she didn't get her time to shine. Following on from Casey, all the original sins were in Zoophobia. Viv ended up reusing a lot of these concepts for Helluva Boss and Hazbin, but personally I think the Zoophobia iterations are just as good. Jestine was the sin of pride, watching over dreams as a sort of punishment. I discussed her earlier in the Scrap the Dream segment. Justine was part of the original sins, and during early development there was actually 9 sins, with Damien being the generic sin. A couple other notable sins were Lollygag, the sin of lust, who is asexual, and Don O'Deedle, who is the sin of gluttony. We have the demon hunter Izzy, who is, at least in my eyes, repurposed later to be Cherry Bomb's boyfriend in Hazbin Hotel. He's an Australian hunter who is also a demon, which is pretty ironic. And lastly, we have Mirage, who is one of the more major antagonists. Created way back in 2008, Mirage was the spirit of a 19th century serial killer who took over the body of Gail, a soft-spoken country girl. Gail's soul remains in her body, but is suppressed by Mirage. Gail had brown-green eyes, while Mirage makes them glow blue. Mirage looks to be a really fascinating character, and Viv had a bunch of art pieces on lore wrote up about her. I think her overall concept of being possessed is super intriguing, and reminds me a lot of how the Lich possessed Billy in Adventure Time. The Lich was just such a compelling villain, so I think Mirage also could have been a superb character. While Zoophobia was being made, Vivzie would post art or create content about the world and characters. At least in my eyes, I'd say that there's actually way more outside media and world building than there are pages in the actual webcomic, which really highlights the amount of stories that were waiting to be told in this universe. The first notable piece of outside media was the Son of 666 third-year SVA film uploaded on April 15th, 2013. Like the name suggests, this video was made by Viv during her time studying at the School of Visual Arts College in New York City. The video centers around Damien and his father Satan. Damien is playing with his banjo, which annoys Lucifer since he'll never get an evil demeanor with such an object. He throws the banjo into the lava, which upsets Damien, who runs to his room. As a present, Satan gives Damien a new violin, saying it's far more evil. Damien smashes the violin on the floor, highlighting that he is evil after all. The pair hug. This video is really cute and features Edward Bosco, who you'll probably recognise from his later work in Viv's other projects. In March 2016, Vivzie announced the Zoophobia audio-visual adaptation by posting a teaser video. This adaptation was basically just a fancy version of what you'd call a comic dub today. However, it would feature advanced editing, audio, and sound effects, which would place it a tier above the previous fan-made dubs of the comic. This audio-visual adaptation was shelved unfortunately when Vivzie announced that the Zoophobia reboot was coming. Vivzie would frequently post updates on her Tumblr pages, with the main one being called Zoophobia Crazies. This page was eventually deleted, so years of content was basically permanently gone. Personally, I think this is a huge shame. It would be interesting to go back through that account and see how the series progressed and to see Viv's early art style. I wasn't able to find a concrete answer on why this page was deleted, but I'd theorise that it was something to do with Viv stepping away from the series, so she wiped that page to maybe start from a clean slate, or she was just embarrassed by some of the old content on there. While doing research, I came across 2 Zoophobia forums Vivzie made, with the first one dating back to June of 2009. She made 10 posts on the forum, and unfortunately it's pretty bare bones. You can create an account, however it sends an email to the owner of the site, so they have to manually accept it, which is presumably Vivzie. Looking through the posts, we can see Vivzie roleplaying with a couple users, and the most interesting piece is this page she made about Venganza, the vampire queen from earlier. This was posted back in 2009, showing how far back she envisioned that character. The last post was a comment from Viv in 2013, where she refers one user to the other Zoophobia webcomic forum. The other Zoophobia webcomic forum operates similarly to the previous one, however it's inactive. Personally, I think these forums were a cool concept. It's great to chat with fans and receive critiques on your work, so I think these forums were a good outlet for that. However, it seems they sort of lost popularity as time went on and are basically dead today. As I explained earlier in the video, the Zoophobia webcomic was put on an indefinite hiatus. Prior to this, however, Vivzie made a tweet longer on the 22nd of March 2016, venting about her thoughts on the series. She explained that she used Twitter as an outlet to vent her anger, which was unhealthy, but she was struggling with having to manage so many things at once. This, combined with rising criticism and toxicity, started to take a toll on her mentally, causing her enjoyment of creating Zoophobia to plummet. I'll have the full tweet longer on screen if you'd like to pause and read in your own time. However, towards the end, she mentions that she will be changing her uploading schedule around Zoophobia. Instead of posting page by page when they're ready, she will swap to posting arcs only as PDFs on Gumroad or Patreon. After this announcement, some fans were a bit worried, since it seemed like the only way to keep up with the series was to pay $10 per arc on Gumroad. Personally, I think this was just a bad idea overall. It prevented a lot of fans, especially younger viewers with no disposable income, from following along with Zoophobia. Added to this, it promoted piracy, since people who already hated her would just leak these chapters online, either to spite Viv or just out of principle. People who paid to see the project would get screwed over by the leakers and get upset as a result. The rest of the twitlonger mentions Vivzie's on and off battle with Twitter and fan backlash. If you've watched any other video of mine, you'll know that this was a recurring issue for her up until about 2023, where she finally stopped using Twitter to respond to criticism or to vent her thoughts. In my eyes, the best solution is just to release the pages like normal. However, once each book is complete, she could then sell these as both digital and paperback books. This means that fans have the opportunity to financially support Viv, but also gain a physical copy to put on their shelves. This also screws over the leakers, since there's nothing to leak. I think lots of people would follow along for free each week and then gladly spend some money to get a proper book in their hands once they've finished reading, so that they can enjoy it a second time around. Eventually, at an unknown date, the Gumroad Zoophobia plan was dropped, and the entire thing was put on ice, which was probably for the best. There was light at the end of the tunnel, however, and this came in the form of the Zoophobia Bad Luck Jack short. Released on September 30th, 2020, this 11-minute animated video took place in the Zoophobia world. However, it was unclear if this was a retcon of the previous lore to serve as a clean slate, or as a test to gauge audience reaction to the series. Personally, I think it was a bit of both. This short was advertised a couple times on the now inactive Spindlehorse Toons account. Vivzie also mentioned it in a few Patreon posts, though she stated it was a one-off short, which again reaffirms my belief that this was essentially a pilot to see how people would react. So the short starts off with Kayla and Zill singing the first song of the episode called Make a Start. The rest of the band consists of others in the main five, being Spam, Venexa and Jack. They're performing inside the concert area and the song is abruptly interrupted by Damien, who sets the piano alight. Jack gets injured again due to his curse. Later in the locker area, Rusty makes fun of Jack, but Autumn calls Rusty by his real name, Ruben, which annoys him. Zill offers to protect Jack for the rest of the day from his curse, and we get a funny montage of the pair together. Eventually, Jack gets annoyed because Zill is getting injured due to his curse and he feels bad, so Jack runs off to sing the second song of the episode called The Curse. At the end of the song, Jack runs into a huge monster. We then cut to Kayla, Spam and Venexa having a picnic. Zill shows up and asks the gang for help with Jack and they run to save Jack from the monster. This starts the third and final song of the episode called Monster Fighting Time. They successfully scare off the monster and the group has a wholesome reunion. Jack feels much better and says he won't take their friendship for granted, only to get hit by a random bus. The next day we see Zill and Jack talking at school when Rusty comes up to make fun of Jack again. Jack says that Rusty has no friends, which embarrasses Rusty, and Autumn laughs in the background. The gang all laugh and go into school together. The short was overall pretty successful, garnering over 16 million views and 700,000 likes. However, if you compare its stats to other videos released around that time period, especially Helluva and Hazbin Hotel, this video and the Holidays one got significantly less views, to the difference of tens of millions. As a result, you could broadly say that it wasn't as popular as the team had hoped, especially since the other shows gained a lot of views over the years, while the Bad Luck Jack short sort of stagnated. So what did I think of the short? Overall, I really enjoyed it. At least in my personal opinion, I think this world has far more vibrancy and personality than both Hazbin Hotel and Helluva. The wonderful colours and cast of characters just mix so well, the animation is just superb. The casting was generally pretty solid, though there are two voices that I think don't match, which I'll get into later. I think Zill and Venexa sound wonderful, and Venexa is probably my favourite out of the main five. Her personality and design reminds me a lot of Raven from Teen Titans, and her voice fits so well. Ruben and Autumn's dynamic was pretty fun, and from the short it's pretty clear that there's some tension between them. I think Rusty and Autumn is my favourite ship out of the entire show. The pacing and plot of the episode was great, provided it was only 11 minutes long. We got a decent amount of exposition and got to see the main five and a couple side characters show up. The episode had 3 songs and I liked them all. I think The Curse was the weakest out of the 3, however Monster Fighting Time makes up for it. That one started a little slow, but the side bit about bumblebees and the change of instrumental was very good. There are a couple of issues. The first is the notable absence of Cameron. She was the main character in the Zoophobia webcomic, but she's nowhere to be seen in this short. The logical explanation is that this is just a short about Jack and the main five, so that's why Cameron is missing. Though personally, I think it's a bit of a shame. It would have been cool to at least see a cameo from her. This short was a lot of people's first introduction to the Zoophobia series after the success of Hazbin and Helluva. However, a major part of the story, being Cameron, is completely missing. Another issue I touched on a bit earlier is that I dislike a few of the characters' voices, mainly Spam and Kayla. In my opinion, neither of these characters have voices that fit them, and they are both walking stereotypes. Kayla is an Australian kangaroo, which makes sense, however her voice actor, Reba Burr, is American. The voice she put on is just extremely forced and generic.
Told them, mate, you really don't know who you were talking to. I've spent enough time in the bush busy at Hard Yakka with my folks to believe some drongo telling a furphy.
I didn't understand a word you just said.
Kayla! I showed it to an Australian friend of mine, Jamef, and he agreed that it just sounds awful. The other example is Spam. Spam is Irish, which is a bit odd considering, at least from my knowledge, he was never mentioned as being Irish throughout the webcomic. His name being O'Brien is basically like him being called Fiddly-Dee Lucky Charms. I'm Northern Irish, and when I heard the accent it just sounded like another walking stereotype of a leprechaun voice you'd hear in Family Guy or something. I looked up the voice actor and again it's another American called Eric Shonk from New York City. It's even more odd because the voices are also immediately swapped during the songs. Eric voices Spam normally, but during Monster Fighting Time he's voiced by Parry Grip. So we're introduced to this walking stereotype with a dodgy forced accent of what an American thinks an Irish person sounds like, and then 20 seconds later their voice swaps to a completely different American one. It's bizarre.
Oh, I'm gonna write a song about this!
Must you?
Why, thank you!
That monster hurt like never before. Whoa.
I made them up!
You sure did, buddy.
It's a real shame because representation is cool and it's always nice to have characters you can relate to, but it's a bit of a letdown that they dropped the ball in the voice acting department during this short. Mammon, who we meet later in Helluva Boss, was voiced by Michael Cusack and it was a fantastic choice, so I do have hope that casting based on nationality can be done well. A lot of Irish and Australian voice actors are dying for work, so it's a bit disheartening to see these roles given to Americans just for them to do a subpar job. I really hope that if they bring Zoophobia back again, they make some alterations to the voices. On the topic of songs, since the episode is 11 minutes long and has 3 songs, the songs just kind of cut in out of nowhere. The main example being the gap between the curse and monster fighting time. We have the somber moment of Jack talking about how his curse impacts him, and not even a minute later we're straight into this upbeat song. It kicks in rather oddly with no time to breathe and just feels forced. This is just another symptom of it being a short. I'd much rather have Jack's segment just be normal dialogue, perhaps with Zill rather than a song. That way you have the song at the start, a plot-focused section in the middle, and then the final song at the end to finish things off. This would have improved the pacing as well, I feel. So with the webcomic and all its various outside components covered, it's time to finally get into my thoughts on it. I'll start off with the things I liked. Firstly, the world building and character designs are wonderful. The entire concept of Safe Haven is really intriguing, and all of the characters within the Zoophobia world have so much character put into them. They all have such vibrant designs and their own backstories, which explain why they act the way they do. As I mentioned with the Zoophobia short, I genuinely think that Vivzie and her team is better at designing these anthropomorphic furry characters than they are at demons in the other shows. A lot of the complaints people have about Hazbin or Helluva, such as the similar looking colour palettes, the amount of sharp teeth in suits, or the skinny body types, don't exist in Zoophobia. A couple of my favourites are all of the werewolf characters like JJ. Harley and Scarlet. Harley in particular reminds me a lot of Avril Lavigne's character from Over the Hedge, Phoenixa, Autumn, Jolene, and Damien. The day-to-day plot and pacing feels quite grounded. In what we saw of the story so far in the webcomic, we get to see Cameron get accustomed to Safe Haven. We're in the same boots as her where we start off not knowing anyone, but as time goes on learn the characters' names and what their roles within the school is. Compared to Vivziepop's other projects where the stakes are usually quite high, it's a nice change of pace to see a regularly simple story. Cameron is in a mystical world with magic and furry creatures. However, it doesn't feel too dissimilar from the real human world with its infrastructure and rules, which I like. Although Cameron is the main protagonist, plenty of other characters in the story get lots of development, mainly Damien and the main 5. This makes them really memorable, and not one-off side gags that you'll forget. Some of the best stories are the backstory between Zill and Jack, Damien's upbringing, and how Zill met Kayla. The cast are all given motivations, and it was great to find out why they tick. Though unfortunately, since the series ended prematurely, a couple of characters were left without proper development, mainly Spam and Phoenixa. One of my favourite things about the series is the artwork. The drawings are all wonderful and ooze Vivziepop's signature art style. I looked through old forum threads from 10 years ago and seen lots of criticism about Vivzie's drawings and line art. Personally, I think this is complete nonsense. The art definitely holds up to this day, even a decade later. Another aspect I was a fan of was introducing characters for them to play a role later, my favourite being KC. It was really interesting to see her little slides at the end of each chapter, and it gave this ominous feeling that Cameron was always being watched. Having a villain that contributes and has impact on the story throughout is one of my favourite tropes. Though again, since the story was never completed, we unfortunately never found out what Casey's motivations were and why she sent Cameron to Safe Haven in the first place. That's the thing with Zoophobia. The overall story and world was well crafted and had tons of potential, but unfortunately since it was cut short we never got to see that realised. There are some criticisms that I picked up on throughout my time reading the comic and its media. The first being the divergence away from Cameron. You might have noticed this in some of the later scrapped chapters that I mentioned, but it seems like Viv would put Cameron in the backseat of the story to instead give other characters the spotlight, especially the main 5. This was also evident in the Zoophobia short, where Cameron was missing. Personally, I'm not a fan of this approach. Cameron served well as the main anchor and protagonist, and we basically got to see the world through her eyes. It's clear that Vivzie had a lot of ideas for her and the rest of the cast, but struggled to balance them all together. As a result, from the way things look, Cameron would have got left behind, while all the other characters came to the forefront. Developing the cast is fine, but it should never come at the cost of the main protagonist. I personally don't think it's right to have Cameron come in just to introduce us to the world and get put in the background, especially since she has the unique position of being one of the few humans in Safe Haven, and the entire story is named after the condition she suffers from. Following on from that point, the overall plot was a little messy and derailed several times. One example being the chapter about Addison and Gustav. Personally, I don't think this was needed at all and just served to take attention away from Cameron and the main five. It's even worse because the relationship between Gustav and Addison ended up being a never-ending cycle of drama due to the issues regarding their age gap and the power imbalance. The proposed section later in the story about Addison being mind-controlled in a lab just comes across as poor writing in my opinion. As I explained, the story had this grounded, down-to-earth atmosphere, but going off in these tangents with sci-fi nonsense just detracts from the overall experience. There was some other edgy artwork that just didn't age well. It comes across as a product of its time. Similarly, I feel like there was an over-reliance on relationships and shipping. There were a couple really good couples with clear chemistry, my two favourites being Zilla and Kayla or Styx and Tenta. With the time I've spent on the wiki, it feels like every other character was either in a relationship with someone else or was a part of their lore. This isn't unique to Zoophobia, it's present in Vivzie's other projects. However, in Viv's other projects, a lot of these characters had clear chemistry, but in Zoophobia some of these just don't make sense. Again, like I said earlier, Gustav and Addison's segments just came across as a bit odd and didn't feel necessary. I feel like it would have been better to have a couple solid ships that are canon, and leave the rest of the stuff to fans to discuss. This isn't necessarily related to the content of the webcomic itself, but it's important to note that the pace at which it was published wasn't very consistent. This is a criticism I've seen of Viv for several years, that she juggles a lot of projects, and as a result the workload slows down and things take a while to come out. This is especially true with Zoophobia. At least 10 books were planned, but only part of one was ever made. I've read online that Vivzie allegedly would take 7 hours per page, which is a decent balance considering the amount of work put into them. However, it's clear to me that the rate at which pages were being produced wasn't up to scratch. I've seen a lot of people frustrated about this in online forums, and I can see where they're coming from. It feels like the comic was created, but all of the side stuff around it just started to envelop the story. So as a result, you have all these characters, speed draws, and other pieces of content being made, while the actual webcomic itself sits dormant. With the benefit of hindsight, we know that Vivzie focusing on her other projects was the right decision in the long term, though it's a shame that it came at the cost of Zoophobia. Hazbin Hotel and Helluva Boss wouldn't exist without Zoophobia. However, Zoophobia had to take the fall for the other two to succeed, which is both sad, but also a good thing in general. I'm really happy that at least some concepts of this series lived on in Viv's other projects. On the topic of criticism, after scrolling through various forums and posts, I personally think a lot of the criticism for this webcomic was complete nonsense. These posts were 10 years ago, so obviously it was a different era. However, some of these so-called critics genuinely had no idea what they were talking about. One example is the various Tumblr blogs dedicated to criticising Vivziepop and the webcomic. If you go through these pages, they literally spent months of their lives bashing the series, and then eventually ditched their pages. It just screams terminally online, especially when a lot of these criticisms are extremely weak and just hate disguised as feedback. It's a shame because a key reason that Viv stopped the comic was due to the constant backlash and criticism. In a tweet from 2023, one fan who asked Vivzie about why Zoophobia was cancelled. Viv's response was that this fan toxicity is partly why she stopped it and that their attitude was this perfect example. Another example is the bad webcomic forum. There's hundreds of pages of people criticising the comic, but if you go through them page by page, their points just don't hold any weight at all. A lot of them are just bitter that the story wasn't going the way they wanted it to, so they lashed out on these forums. All of these pages and forums are entirely dead and rotting, with about one post every other day. Eventually Viv learned that if you ignore these people, they'll go away, which is great to see, though it's a shame that the toxic discourse caused Viv and a lot of fans to walk away from the project. So that's everything to do with Zoophobia. What do I think? Overall, I think it's a great series, and I sincerely hope it returns in the future. Although I wouldn't say it's necessarily better than Hazbin or Helluva, I feel that the world and characters have so much potential that unfortunately never got realised. I can see why it cultivated such a dedicated audience, and I hope I did everyone justice through this video. If you have any thoughts about the video or just Zoophobia as a whole, I'd love for you to leave them in the comments section down below. Thanks for watching.